Good evening, everyone. I will now call a special board meeting of March 27th, 2024 to order. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live. Are there any declarations of interest at this time? I'm seeing none. There are no declarations of interest at this time. Can I have a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda as distributed? Thank you, Trustee Arsenault. Thank you, Trustee Brown. I will now ask trustees to vote on the motion. The agenda, then, if you're in favor of the agenda, approve the agenda as distributed? Yes, and the agenda is approved. Motion carries. We have one recommended action this evening to deal with the resignation of Trustee Linda Stone. Staff has prepared a brief report outlining the requirements of the Board of Trustees to consider the resignation and have also provided potential next steps in accordance with the Education Act and the bylaws. Are there any questions from trustees? Seeing none. Trustee Panillo.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I was just going to ask if I could move the motion to accept the resignation.
Thank you, Trustee Panillo. Is there a seconder for the motion? Trustee Oldfield. I will now ask trustees to vote on the motion, and may we have, Gillian, a recorded vote?
Through the chair, I'll call the recorded vote. Trustee Arsenault?
In favor.
Trustee Brown?
In favor.
Trustee Cunningham?
In favor.
Trustee Edwards?
In favor.
Trustee Oldfield?
In favor.
Trustee Miller?
In favor.
Oh, I'm sorry. Trustee Linton online?
In favor.
Thank you. Trustee Morton?
In favor.
Trustee Panillo?
In favor.
And Chair Thatcher?
In favor.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'll now call the student trustee non-binding vote. Student trustee Cameron?
In favor.
Thank you. Through the chair, we have 10 trustees in favor, 2 trustees absent, no abstentions, and 1 student trustee in favor, 2 student trustees absent.
Thank you, Gillian. The motion is carried. As there is no further business on the agenda, may I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Trustee Cunningham, seconder Trustee Edwards. All in favor? Motion carries. This meeting is now adjourned.
Good evening, and welcome to the Governance and Policy Committee meeting of March 27th, 2024. I shall now call this meeting to order. Trustees are reminded that as this is a committee, it is the appropriate place for discussion of agenda items before they proceed to board as applicable. Following staff presentation of each report, discussion will be open for trustees. I will begin with the land acknowledgement. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territories of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live. Are there any declarations of interest tonight? As there are no declarations of interest at this time, I will move forward. May I have a motion to approve the draft agenda? Thank you, Chair Thatcher. All in favor? This motion carries. Can I please have a motion to approve the revised draft minutes of the Governance and Policy Committee of December 13th, 2023, as well as the draft minutes of the Special Governance and Policy Committee meeting of February 5th, 2024? Thank you, Trustee Arsenal and Trustee Edwards. All in favor? This motion carries. We have 3 agenda items coming forward this evening for information. Apologies. The first information item today is the 2023 year-end report on policies, procedures, and regulations. I'll call on Executive Lead Robert Surjanic and General Counsel Patrick Cotter.
Thank you, and through you. In your report, you'll find that on, I think, pages 10. We're pleased to share with the committee our year-end report on policies, procedures, and regulations for the 2023 calendar year. Currently, the DDSB has 48 regulations, 94 policies, and 143 procedures in effect. 4 years ago, there were about 74 active regulations. So 4 years ago, the board had actually passed a motion confirming the phase out of all regulations. So since then, 26 regulations have been rescinded or turned into policy and procedure. During the last calendar year, 20 policies and 17 regulations were rescinded, with 3 policies being revised. In addition, there were 20 procedures were rescinded by Administrative Council, 6 were revised, and 6 new procedures were put into effect. That's shared with folks in the report tonight. Further to the schedule that was shared with the committee in December 2023, staff are currently analyzing which policies and regulations will be able to come forward before the committee for the remainder of 2024, and we're planning on presenting that for information to the committee at the May meeting. And that's the report.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you, Executive Lead Surjanic, and I will move to the next item on our agenda, which is item 6B, bylaws, public question period, and I will again pass it to Executive Lead Robert Surjanic and General Counsel Patrick Cotter.
Thank you, and through you. Pursuant to a motion that was passed at the December Governance and Policy Committee meeting, we're bringing this report forward. Previously, in 2023, the board had undertook a detailed review and made changes to the public question period process, and that was following the pause in public attendance at board meetings, which was done to really protect the safety of those in attendance due to some of the disruptions, threatening behavior, and vulgar slurs that took place during those meetings. Some of the changes that the board made have now helped ensure that the public question period process is not contrary to the board's commitments and statutory duties under the Education Act, the Ontario Human Rights Code, and the board's human rights policy and Indigenous education policy and procedures. Those changes made were intended to ensure that the public had the opportunity to participate in a fair and equitable way while ensuring the business of the board could still move forward in a timely and professional manner. It's also helped to ensure that public question period takes place in a structured manner that respects all participants, including staff who are answering questions in a public meeting. We have conducted a brief jurisdictional scan of school boards of a similar or larger size, and through our scan, we're not able to find any other school board that allows public questions at public meetings, of board meetings of this nature. In the past, the public question period has been used by some as a method to engage in debate. So we saw some of the disruptions in behavior that followed from some of the sessions last year. And as a result, additional safety and security measures were put in place for public meetings, and the board undertook changes to the bylaws. Based on the public nature of board meetings and the importance of providing clear and accurate information to the public and trustees, staff are not supportive of any changes that would verge on debate during public question period. This has the potential to create harm for the board and to staff, and could expose the board to additional challenges. The current process, though, in our view, gives members of the public the ability to ask questions at board meetings, and those questions are submitted in advance. They provide us and the chair the ability to review those questions in accordance with the bylaws, and then from a staff perspective to consider appropriate responses, which are after the meeting posted on the board's website for the benefit of all to review and see. Should the committee wish to include a provision in the bylaws, there is an option to do so there, but as questions are submitted in advance and responses are very carefully considered and read out at meetings and posted on the website, I don't think there'll be anything additional to add at that time if that were to take place. And that's the report in the package.
Thank you, Executive Lead Robert Surjanek. Would anyone like to raise any discussion issues around the idea of public question period? Student Trustee Cameron?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction, but on the topic. We recently had a presentation for trustee professional development talking about our governance practices at the board. And I think for those of us who are in the room, we got the message pretty clearly that question period actually doesn't advance the board's governance practices in a way that is proper, you know. So I don't think we should have a question period because I'm listening to the expert and I see no reason to disagree at this moment. So I'm going to suggest for the board that the committee recommend to the board that sections 5.13.13 to 5.13.16 of the bylaws be deleted and that it be considered at the next meeting of the board.
Thank you, Student Trustee Cameron. Would any trustees like to move that as a motion? Trustee Oldfield? Could we get those bylaws up on the screen, please, Jillian? Can I get someone to second that motion? Trustee Pinello, thank you. Thank you. Would you mind highlighting the specific sections?
I would note for the committee that the sections concerning public question period are included in the package as Appendix A as well, just for the benefit of trustees. Just the screen is not very large.
Now that we can see them up on the screen, would anyone like to speak to the motion to remove these sections from the bylaws?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. There's just the admin side of me again. I'm looking at this whole consolidated bylaw because I'm noticing that we've got it highlighted from 5.13, when in fact you're going to have to do it from 4.2 if this is to be a consideration, because it kind of makes everything else redundant. Because in 4.2.9, the terms of reference of the Committee of the Whole states. So it's almost like, that's how I'm reading it, is that if you are going to be considering 5.13, well, then you also need to consider 4.2 because they actually go hand in hand.
Thank you, Trustee Brown. Would you like to propose an amendment to the motion?
No, through you, Chair, no, because I don't actually agree with this motion.
Trustee Pinello?
Thank you, Chair. Through you. To Trustee Brown's point, I might disagree just because I think the clarification for me, and I'm voicing it aloud, is that this is targeting specifically the question period and not necessarily the ability for people to make presentations at the board and at the standing meetings, which are two distinct processes. So this would not impede people's ability to present to us, because I think that's where we see a lot of community groups and organizations, which I think is important. Happy to debate on the question piece, but did just, I guess, want to clarify either with Student Trustee Cameron or through the chair that this is just for the questions and wouldn't impact folks' ability to do presentations at standing or regular board.
Through you, Chair Cunningham, if I may. That's correct, Trustee Pinello. So there are two processes in the bylaws. One is to make a presentation. Those presentations go to standing committee. And so that is what the section that Trustee Brown was referencing was the terms of reference for the standing committee and making presentations to the standing committee. For board, it is public questions. And that's the sections that are at issue with the motion that's on the floor.
Trustee Arsenault?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. My only problem with this is that we invite parents to come and ask questions, and which is what we would like them to do, is have a voice. The way that we were doing it currently with the board answering their questions, I feel like there needs to be another way of doing it instead of just removing the whole entire thing. I don't know what that's going to look like, but as soon as we tell parents they cannot ask questions, I feel like we're not listening. So I feel like we need to kind of figure out what we're going to do and how we're going to do it instead of saying we're just going to remove the whole thing and they can't have a question period. That's my thought.
Thank you, Trustee Arsenault. Trustee Morton?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I'm in agreement with Trustee Arsenault, we are answering to the public. I like the way that our public question period is now handled. It's handled in a respectful manner. Those parents are getting the answers that they need. So I'm sorry I could not support this motion.
Trustee Miller? Oh, sorry, Trustee Oldfield.
Yeah, sorry. I support this because the board meeting is where the board's meant to do business. And so I think that one of the things that this board's tasked with, not to disagree with Trustee Arsenault, that there needs to be something in place, hopefully something better than a very small period of time once a month at a board meeting. But the board meeting is where the board does business, and there needs to be something else in place to deal with questions and making that connection to the community. But I do support this motion because we should not be doing public questions at a board meeting. That isn't actually good governance. It's where we're supposed to be doing the board meeting business.
Thank you, Trustee Oldfield. Trustee Edwards.
Thank you. And I know it is good governance practice to basically not deal with basically operational questions. That's generally what comes forward at our board meetings. My concern is, similar to Trustee Arsenault and Trustee Morton, is that we have put a strategic plan together that talks about communications. And what we're doing is we're eliminating something that is a process before we put something else in place. So I have a bit of a difficulty eliminating it at this time. I do think it does need to be eliminated, but I'm looking at as part of the strategic plan that maybe we come, because communications is one of the key areas that we have talked about, that we need to better effectively communicate some of the issues around to our parents, to our members of the public. So I really, at this time, I mean, if it still goes forward as a recommendation to the board, I'd look at amending it to maybe say come the new school year or something that we could look. But I also think that the public should be asked how they, in that whole consultation about how we can get communication better, effective communication, where they're looking. Plus, we have a website that isn't effective as well. So until this gets those action items come forward, and I feel that the communication issues are being addressed, and somehow I have a difficulty supporting this at this time. Thank you.
Student Trustee Cameron.
Thank you, Chair. A couple different things to add. I went and reviewed just the bylaws quickly, and I think what Trustee Brown was mentioning was relating to standing committee and presentations, not question period. And I do support presentations at standing committee. You know, we've talked about what is the point of standing committee and how is it different from a board meeting. We can allow presentations and public input where they give us feedback or they tell us about an issue that we might not know about. But we have to look at what kind of avenues of communication. I believe that we should have more communication, but is question period solving our problems? I don't think it is, and I think it's actually making it worse. And so what avenues do we have? We have presentations, we have trustees, we have principals, we have staff that parents can all reach out to, and I know they do. And so is public question period solving our problems as it is right now? No, I just think it bogs us down and makes us a less effective board.
Thank you. Trustee Pinello.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I can't technically move to defer this motion, but given the conversation, I do agree with the sentiment that I think this is something we can consider, and maybe it should be done in tandem with conversations about how we want to reimagine this process. I think it's a powerful conversation, and you know, even just thinking about how can we as trustees better serve the folks in our communities in terms of when they ask us questions, are we given space to then bring those forward in a place where the public can hear those answers? Not all the time. And so is there a way for us to do this in a place like standing or a place like even governance, if it is a policy-related question, which sometimes we do get, where we're making best use of our time, but keeping board meetings to sort of business of the board, in an effort to build something that is more accessible, but also in tandem with this, we're not just deleting without replacing. So I don't think I can move it because I've spoken already, if we're following Robert's rules. So if someone else who hasn't spoken would like to move to defer, unless Council Cotter wants to grant me a magical power to defer, perfect. So I'd like to move that we defer this motion, perhaps for a future governance and policy meeting where we can have the conversation about replacing or reimagining public question period.
Thank you, Trustee Pinello. Just for one point of clarification, would that deferment include asking staff for any kind of advice?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I think it would be helpful not to have staff rehash what they've got in this report, but I would be interested to know how other boards are engaging community, if they are in some other way that we're not, and also perhaps if there have been in the past any outreach to community and asking how they would like to be engaged with their board of trustees, that information might be beneficial. I realize we might have to do some sort of survey and engagement piece again, which is fine, but if there's something that already exists, I think those two pieces would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, then I think what we have right now is a motion to postpone this to the next governance meeting and get some advice from staff for that meeting.
There's a hand online.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Trustee Linton.
No, it's okay. I don't know if now's the time, but I'm seconding that motion. Like, I fully agree.
The motion to defer is now seconded.
Yes.
Let's call the question. Would all in favor of deferment to the next meeting with some guidance from staff coming forward? That motion carries. Thank you. I will move on to information item 6C, the draft policy of the board self-assessment, and I will turn it over to General Counsel Patrick Cotter and Executive Lead Robert Surdenik.
Thank you very much, and through you, Chair Cunningham. The report can be found at page 28 of your package. This matter came before the committee on February 5, 2024, and it's returning back to the committee based on comments from the February 5th meeting. The first change that's been made to the draft policy is attached again at page 28. The first change to the draft policy coming out of the last committee meeting was the draft policy now contemplates a standalone committee of the board to manage the self-assessment process rather than being merged with the Director's Performance Review Committee. So that's the first change. There were two other discussion points coming out of the last meeting that are also reflected in the report. The first is a canvassing of the approach of other school boards, which we've done, and we've included the self-assessment policies from the Ottawa Carleton District School Board and the Blue Water District School Board. They're attached. And we did find some other self-assessments being done by some of the other boards, but they're not in board policy. We have referenced them, but we don't have policies from them attached. And so there was some discussion about whether it's appropriate to be in a policy or in a resolution. And ultimately, that's a judgment call for the board to make. But I think the report indicates some of the, one of the issues with it not being in a policy is the public can't find it. We couldn't find the self-assessments for those boards that didn't have it in a policy, and the boards that had it in a policy we were able to locate. So I think it does improve transparency to have it in a policy. But I don't think that's a stumbling block either way to the board moving forward with the self-assessment should it wish to do so. The second thing, no, those were the 2 points that were discussed. Was with whether it would be in a policy and the approach of other boards. So subject to any questions you may have, that is our report.
Thank you. I will open up the floor for discussion. Trustee Edwards.
Sorry. That was my microphone.
Oh,
Sorry.
apologies.
That's all right.
1 second.
Thank you, and I appreciate the changes that have been made at this point in time, the fact that it's a separate committee. And I agree that, you know, for transparency, that it should be in a policy for people to find. If they had a website that could find it, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. But one comment I have is under section 5.2. We talk about as far as what the feedback is going to be provided for. In 5.3, we actually say that we're going to put in 6, we're saying we're going to put basically develop goals and priorities for the coming year. I would suggest that in under 5.2 that we add an item 6 that basically says we will also get feedback on our basically progress on our goals that we have set. And as far as our goals and priorities that we've set for the upcoming year. I think that's really important if we're going to be doing this on an annual basis.
Thank you, Trustee Edwards. Would you like to put forward a motion that we adopt this policy with that addition that you just mentioned in place?
Okay. So I would like to put a motion forward to adopt the Board of Trustees self-assessment policy with the amendment of, on 5.2, we're going to have item 6, is that, I'm trying to think of the wording here. Basically, because it says feedback already, in case feedback on the following, so on the goals and priorities set for the previous year.
I think you, not that I want to put words in your mouth, Trustee Edwards, but I think you said progress on the,
Yeah,
progress on the goals and priorities.
Yeah, progress on the goals and priorities set for the previous year.
And I think, just consistent with our practice, if you could also include in your motion whether that's to be considered the next meeting of the board or not.
Yes, to be considered at the next meeting, sorry. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Jillian, would you be able to put that up on the screen? Thank you. Thank you. Student Trustee Cameron.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to read that, but I'll do that after. I have a question for Council Cotter. The external consultant is at the discretion, I guess hiring an external consultant is at the discretion of the committee every year under this policy. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, as drafted, but the committee, I suppose, could make a decision to hire a consultant for 2 years. I don't think that would be offside the policy for the committee to do that.
Trustee Brown?
Thank you. I wanted to second that motion. Are we taking seconds today? Okay, yes, I'd very much like to second that motion.
Thank you, Trustee Brown. Is there any further discussion? Then I will call the question. All in favor of adopting this policy, including the recommended addition by Trustee Edwards? This motion carries. Thank you. We will move forward to Section 7 on the agenda, recommended actions. The first is a recession of accessible customer service policy and regulation. And I will turn it over to Superintendent Heather Mundy, Executive Lead Robert Surjanek, and General Counsel Cotter.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Following the presentation to governance on December 13th, we did return to SEAC to share the recommendation to rescind the accessible customer service policy and regulation, noting that this would mean the accessibility procedure would fall under the human rights policy. On page 48 of your agenda, you will find the consultations from our meeting with SEAC on January 18th. We did hear from a few members. I think there was consensus that it made sense for the accessible customer service to, for the accessibility procedure to lie under the human rights policy, but the biggest concern that came forward was in terms of ensuring that community, family, when they went to look up accessibility, that they would find that policy along with the procedure so that there was clarity for anyone to understand the policy that supported it. So based on that feedback, we are recommending, that the accessible customer service policy and regulation be rescinded, and that the procedure as shared previously would fall under the human rights policy, and that we will work to ensure that there's keywords that allow that link for community and families. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Mundy. Any discussion? Trustee Edwards.
Thank you. And agree that the regulation and customer service policy is really covered under human rights policy. However, based on the comments from SEAC and basically around finding accessibility, plus the fact that, you know, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but under the 4th review of AODA, Ontario is in a crisis. Not that we need the actual accessible customer policy, but I still think that we need a policy, an accessibility policy. So, because under Regulation 191.11, integrated accessibility standards under the Accessibility for Ontario Disability Act requires an organization to create written accessibility policies and make them publicly available. So accessibility policies are the formal rules of what an organization puts in place to achieve its accessibility goals. And the law is flexible, and I do know that there's no right or wrong way to do this, and somebody mentioned about being repetitive. However, I would think that we need an accessibility policy that then links to our procedures or the human rights accessibility procedure. And so I would really suggest, and I will put a motion eventually, that the Durham District School Board create an accessibility policy, and it's just a simple statement around that the Durham District School Board is committed to ensuring equal access and participation for people with disabilities, and that understanding that we will do so by preventing barriers to accessibility, meeting our accessibility requirements. And we do understand that the obligations under the Accessibility Ontario Disability Act and its accessibility standards do not substitute or limit our obligations under the Ontario Human Rights Code. And then in there, then say the procedures can be found under the Ontario Human Rights policy and procedures. I think it's really crucial that we have that so that people understand that they can find it, that's an accessibility and so forth. So although I do agree with rescinding this, I'm going to probably put a motion forward for the board to draft an accessibility policy. And so that then refers to those, so that it's clear, it's concise, and anybody looking for the term accessibility can find it instead of under human rights policy. Thank you.
Trustee Edwards, would you like to put forward a motion?
I think that in order to deal with the process, I think I was going to add it sort of after. It would be a 2 motions sort of thing, because I think it's appropriate that I have that the board rescind the accessible customer accessibility policy and regulation, and then I would put a second motion to deal with the board create an accessibility policy, because I don't think if we can do it separately. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
okay.
you, Trustee Edwards. We will bring that back, that second part, back at the next meeting.
Yeah, okay.
Well, one thing, if I might, make a suggestion. Your motion could be that it go to, that the
The consideration
the
of
rescission go to the next board for consideration, and that at that time, staff will also present a draft policy that you've just recommended, because it's only a one-paragraph policy. We could bring it to the next board, and you could do it all at once, if you want, if there's support for it.
I don't, I think that people might have a problem with that, just process, but I mean, I can put that motion forward, and then as far as that, okay, so that the board consider the rescinding of the customer service accessibility policy and procedure, as well as consider the development of an accessibility policy at the next board meeting.
Thank you, Trustee Edwards. Executive Leave, Sir Janik.
I think I guess it depends on what the board or what the committee would be looking for in terms of an accessibility policy. I think given the consultation that took place around this procedure, policy and regulation, while rescinding the policy and regulation, and just the other contacts that as an organization that we have with other folks that are involved in accessibility in the region, it would probably be prudent for us to consult with all of those groups and individuals around what an accessibility policy would look like. Ultimately, it's the will of the committee and the board, but I do think from a timing perspective and bringing something back to the next board meeting and recommending a policy, unless there's very specific language that this committee would just like in a policy, I think is not something that we would be able to put forward, and doing so in consultation with our community partners and other folks who might be interested in providing feedback on that.
Since that motion was not seconded, would you like to make a friendly amendment to give staff more time to consider?
First part stands as that, you know, the board, the governance committee recommend to the Board of Trustees the rescinding of the customers' accessibility policy and procedure, and staff basically consult with partners in developing an accessibility policy at the next board meeting. Sorry. Or at the next.
That's the only.
Jillian, could you put that up on the screen?
I just think in that language there, just depending on what's up on the screen for folks to look at first, because I think right in front of the board here was just the rescission of the accessible customer service policy and regulation. That's all. So.
Thank you, Jillian. Could I get a seconder for this motion? Trustee Pinello?
Thank you, Chair. I am so confused. Is your microphone on, Student Trustee Cameron? Were you waiting to speak?
He is, but
Okay.
there's been a motion put on, and I need it seconded before we go to discussion. Once
Okay.
we go to discussion, then I will go to you.
Got you. I just had a question for my own clarification. My understanding is that before we consider developing the accessibility policy, we need to rescind this one. And so, maybe not necessarily, but on that fact pattern, I wonder if it makes sense for this to come forward at a board meeting. Because if we make the motion now, we still have to pass the motion at board in order for it to be forthcoming, no? I guess I'm just trying to, I think this is important and we should do it. I'm just wondering if maybe we should rescind this and pass this motion, or consider this and debate this motion at board to have that policy work done. And it might give us more time to come back with very specific language around how that consultation process might look. But it's just a suggestion / a question.
I'm happy to weigh in, Chair Cunningham. So I think the way the motion is currently drafted is that this committee always, of course, only makes recommendations to board. So that would go to board, the rescission would go to board the next meeting. The second part of the motion says that, and staff consult with partners in developing an accessibility policy. That does not talk about the board. So that would have to come back to this committee. A staff report would come back to this committee then on the accessibility policy, the standalone accessibility policy. That's the way I think that's the plain reading of that motion. So in other words, the rescission will go to board for approval, and then staff will come back to this committee with the standalone policy. I mean, the point of the report, of course, is that accessibility is already all dealt with in our human rights policy. And I think the point that Trustee Edwards was making was that for transparency and for ease of navigation on the website, that you would be able to pull up a standalone policy. I think that's what she's talking about developing. That would just refer to the human rights policy and make some of those commitment statements.
So again, I'm looking for a seconder. Anyone put up their hand if they'd like to second? Trustee Thatcher? Okay, thank you. We will now open it up for discussion, and I will send it to student trustee Ben. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I have had conversations with members of the board about this, about making sure that when someone looks for accessibility, they find accessibility within our policies. And so when I got this report, I looked at it and I said, oh my gosh, they did it. There's the accessibility procedure. And I think that staff did exactly what I had expected, and I think it works in what we've been given. I think if I'm on the website looking for accessibility and I punch in accessibility, boom, the procedure comes up. And very clearly, right at the top, it says adopted under the human rights, anti-discrimination, and anti-racism policy. And that's where they go if they're looking for the policy. I don't see anything particularly special or valuable in one paragraph that just says policy at the top of the page. So I don't necessarily see the value in doing a standalone policy if it's already considered within the human rights policy. I just don't see anything that's going to be different. And I think this had addressed the concerns through this procedure of what we had seen with navigating the website, which we know could be difficult. So I would not be in favor of developing the standalone policy on accessibility.
Any further discussion? Trustee Oldfield?
I'm just wondering whether or not, even though it's been seconded now, that dividing it into two separate motions makes more sense. And I just want to divide them into two separate motions so that the first part is that the Governance and Policy Committee recommend to the Board of Trustees that the accessible customer service policy and regulation be rescinded and that the matter proceed to the next meeting of the Board of Trustees for consideration, full stop. And then there'd be another motion that says that staff will consult with partners in developing an accessibility policy and report back to governance. And maybe make it clear that it's coming back to governance and just maybe do two separate motions.
I agree that it makes sense to deal with them separately, so let's divide them up that way. Is there any objection to the additional language that Trustee Oldfield put forward? Were you speaking to it? Are you speaking to this? Yeah, so I think it makes sense. Is there any objections to dividing it? Okay, then we will proceed with dividing it and begin with the first part, which speaks to the rescission, which I know Jillian is putting back up on the screen. Thank you. Trustee Edwards, did you have something you wanted to talk about this or the second one? Okay. Would anyone like to have any discussion around this first one? Okay, I will call the question then. All those in favor of rescinding this policy? Oh, do I need? Okay, I'm so sorry. Now that we've divided them, can I get a mover for the first one? Trustee Oldfield, Trustee Miller, thank you. Thank you for that. All in favor? Motion carries, thank you. Trustee Oldfield, could you repeat the extra language you added to number 2, just so we have it up on screen?
It's there, maybe she can't see it because of your head, but back to the Governance and Policy Committee.
Perfect. Jillian's ahead of me. Excellent. Any discussion around number 2? Trustee Edwards.
Okay, so you need a mover of the first one because of now it is in, and I'm moving that the staff consult with partners in developing an accessory policy and report back to the Governance and Policy Committee.
Can I get a seconder? Trustee Brown, thank you. Opening discussion on number 2. Trustee Edwards.
Thank you. And I understand fully what Student Trustee Ben Cameron has said about, good governance, about repetition. However, considering the 4th review of the AODA and saying that there's no leadership, that it isn't being pushed forward, Ontario is in a crisis. At this point in time, I think we need a board statement, separate board statement, that basically endorses that we're pushing accessibility forward. We understand it. And considering I just went to a meeting where there was no understanding, and I'm not talking about a board, it's another meeting, where there was no understanding what is required under AODA, I am really, really, really concerned. So that's why I would like this put forward, and it's just to push that this is in the forefront. Ontario is in a crisis, accessibility crisis. It talks about no leadership, no enforcement, no everything. The procedure, the human rights policy procedure, accessibility has all what is done, what has to happen if somebody makes a request. I'm not asking rewriting that. I'm just saying that we endorse. Basically, we push this forward, and I think it's important for optics, for our parents, and understanding that accessibility is at the forefront, and yes, it will refer to the other procedures that we have, but I think it's really crucial that we still have it at this point in time. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, I will call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to item 7B, the childcare, early years, and after-school recreation programs, a rescission of regulations and consolidation of policies. I will turn it over to Superintendent Aaron Elmhurst, Executive Lead Robert Sujanik, and General Counsel Patrick Cotter.
Perfect. It's ready to go. Awesome. Good evening, and through you, Chair. Tonight's report can be located on pages 61 to 169 of your package. The purpose of the report is to recommend rescission of the early years, childcare, and after-school early years recreation program regulations. There is also a recommendation. We also are recommending the consolidation of the early years, childcare, and after-school early years recreation programs policies into one comprehensive policy. Aligned with the board's dedication to maintaining up-to-date policies that facilitate governance and system operations and phasing out regulations, the Early Years Department has undertaken a thorough review of the childcare, early years, and after-school recreation policies, regulations, and procedures. For your convenience, all current policies and regulations are referenced and linked in Table 2 on page 64 of your package, along with accompanying recommendations and rationale. The Durham District School Board's early years policy, childcare policy, and after-school recreation policy are all governed under the Childcare and Early Years Act of 2014. Within our initial consultation with members of the Early Years Consortium, we were provided guidance to the consolidation of our 3 existing policies into one overarching policy aiming to streamline access for partners, school leaders, and educators. Appendix D contains the 3 regulations that are being recommended for rescission. Relevant information from these regulations has been incorporated into the consolidated policy and revised procedures as listed through the track changes on Appendix C. Policy language has also been updated where necessary in alignment with current legislation, existing policies, and emphasizing the significance of partnerships between our partners, the district, and our schools. Also, a summary of the consultation process, including participants and the feedback received, is outlined in Table 1, starting on page 62 of your package. Each stage of the consultation process included making ongoing amendments reflective of the feedback received in the draft policy in your package and has been shared with all who participated in the consultation process. To facilitate the implementation of the revised policy, updated procedure is also included in your package as Appendix E for your reference. That is my report, and we're happy to take questions.
Thank you. Would anyone like to put forward the recommended motion? Trustee Pinello.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I'd like to move the motion, one motion for the recommendations found under Section 6.0 on page 66 of our package, points 1 and 2, and that the matter be referred to the next meeting of the Board of Trustees.
Thank you. Trustee Morton, would you like to second? Okay, and are you speaking? Are you speaking? I turned your mic on. Or were you just saying seconded?
Okay. Oh, sorry. So the motion has been put forth, and I seconded the motion?
Yes. Okay, thank you. Any discussion around that motion? Trustee Miller.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I just missed the last portion of your report for Appendix E. Was that including changes or updates? Okay, thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, I will call the question. All those in favor? This motion carries. Thank you. This brings us to item 7C, update and recommendations on the Human Rights Advisory Committee. And I will turn this over to Director Camille Williams-Taylor and Associate Director Jim Markowski.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I will turn the mic to Associate Director Markowski. Over to you.
Thank you, Director Williams-Taylor. So through you, Chair Cunningham, the report begins on page 17. With us this evening, I have Secondary Curriculum System Lead, Jacqueline Williams-Leacock, and beside her, Thavika Mathur, our Human Rights Advisor, who will help us with presenting the report. I'll turn it over to Jacqueline to get started.
Thank you very much, Associate Director Markowski, and good evening, everyone. I'm pleased to provide you with an update on the actions taken to date to support the establishment of the Human Rights Advisory Committee and seek your approval of the recommended committee selection criteria, recruitment strategy, and number of committee members. On January 30th of this year, we shared a critical path implementation plan for the establishment of the Human Rights Advisory Committee. The purpose of the Human Rights Advisory Committee is to act in a strategic advisory role to the Board of Trustees to support the GDSB in upholding commitments, objectives, and responsibilities under the human rights, anti-discrimination, and anti-racism policy. We have subsequently adjusted the critical path to reflect the actions completed to date and to refine the plan with proposed new steps and timelines. These changes reflect the input we have received from our external partners and are captured under the critical path implementation plan chart within the report. A list of individuals consulted can be found within the completed actions chart. We prepared a consolidated list of those items requiring trustee approval, which can be found within the recommendations chart that begins on page 6 of the report. We would like to point out that the detail contained in this section of the report is being recommended as a result of our initial conversations with community partners, human rights leaders, and other interested parties we have consulted with. We're excited to share this update with you and look forward to engaging in this important work as we move the development of the committee forward. We're happy to respond to any questions on our work at this time and respectfully request your consideration and approval of our recommendations.
Thank you. Would anyone like to put forward a motion? Would there like to be any discussion before talk of a motion comes forward? Trustee Edwards.
Again, I'm going to sound like a little bit of a broken record today. I appreciate all the work that's gone through all this and so forth, but again, because of the points previously stated, I would really like, when we're looking at selection criteria, to consider it a candidate that has some experience or some around advocacy around people with disabilities. And that in most cases, what I find is that when people talk about AODA, they talk about physical disabilities. And I know that under the Human Rights Code, it talks about, you know, basically accessibility. But I think the lived experience is really needed around the table, because when we still have people making comments about and assumptions about people with the thinking about a person with intellectual disability, and assumptions that are being made, I think that it really is crucial that we add saying that somewhere in there, there's, you know, a selection criteria is that they have some advocacy around for people with disabilities. I think it's crucial, or accessibility, something around accessibility. That's all that I have to say. And then, although it's not for our recommendation, I also think when it comes to training, you should also include AODA, because it's mandatory training anyways, and I think that when it comes to our staff, I think it should be also included for our committee members. So that's just my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Edwards. Trustee Oldfield.
I'm just listening to Trustee Edwards, and I'm wondering, and maybe this is a question, when I'm looking at the committee, I think the last, on page 8 of 9, it talks about a maximum of 12 members, inclusive of staff and trustee members. Additional consideration, membership should include community members and organizations with demonstrated expertise in advancing and protecting human rights. So would that be a place, Trustee Edwards, that we could consider that and be looking for someone with that experience? And I'm not really clear on how that would be determined, how we would go about selecting community members. I mean, that would be one of my questions too.
Through you, Chair, I'll speak on behalf of the staff for the moment. To Trustee Edwards' inquiry, certainly on page 7 of 9 of the report, where it says recommended selection criteria, there is a box there that has a number of nuggets that identify criteria. Certainly with the recommendation from the trustee, there could be the possibility of adding a nugget that says experience and expertise with AODA advocacy or accessibility advocacy. What is contemplated in this this plan is that the representatives around the table at the Human Rights Advocacy or the Human Rights Advisory Committee would in fact be organizations or community partners, not individuals per se. And so in this particular contemplation, it would mean then seeking out either an agency representation. It could even be a partnership with selection from SEAC, because certainly members of SEAC are people who are organizations who have organized understandings of issues of accessibility. So it lends itself to that opportunity in that space. I believe you had another question. What was your other question?
Well, I think you've answered it in part, because my question was, how would we determine who those community members would be? But if you're saying that they may be organizations we work with already at SEAC,
Possibly.
Possibly.
So in the critical path, it does speak to the call out. So there would be a call out for invited, an invitation of interest, and the selection committee would then go through to look at the skills matrix that is expected to ensure that we in fact are meeting the expectations, and that is outlined as a part of the critical path.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Miller?
One moment, please. Okay, I would like to move the motion. However, I would like to give an opportunity if someone had a question before I put forward the motion.
Trustee Pinello.
Thank you, Chair. Through you. My question's very quick. I just wanted to get clarification on page 112 and 113 of our package, or 6 and 7 of 9 in yours. For trustee approval, are those boxes and their recommendations identical and it's just doubled? Okay. Okay. Because I've just been comparing the two, thinking that I'm missing something, but that is helpful. Thank you.
Trustee Brown?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. My question is regarding the 2 trustees' non-voting members. I'm just wondering what that looks like. I don't have much experience with DDSB advisory committees, but is it appointing the 2 trustees as non-voting members? Does that mean everyone else on the advisory committee are voting members? Because it's very specific that it only says trustees.
I'm happy to weigh in, Chair Cunningham, and through you. So the trustees and staff would be non-voting as well. So the community members would be voting, correct?
If I may, Chair, that is not unlike many of the other advisory committees where trustees do sit as non-voting members.
Associate Director Markovsky? Okay. Trustee Miller?
In hearing the discussion, I move that the board approves the recommended recruitment strategy, also approving the recommended selection criteria, and additionally approve the proposed number of committee members.
Thank you. Can I get a seconder? Trustee Thatcher? Is there any objection to adding the bullet point raised by Trustee Edwards? Seeing no objection, we will add that bullet. Any further discussion on this item? Then I will call the question. All in favor? Opposed? That motion carries. I will now move to item 7D, updates and recommendations, Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee, and I will hand it over to Director Camille Williams-Taylor and Superintendent Margaret Lazarus.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Superintendent Lazarus is not with us this afternoon or this evening, and so Associate Director Markowski, along with System Lead Quincy James, are going to be taking this report.
Thank you, Director Williams-Taylor, and again, through you, Trustee Cunningham. The report begins on page 116 of your package this evening, and as Director Williams-Taylor mentioned, with us this evening, I have the Family of Schools and School Operations System Lead, Quincy James, who will be presenting the Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee report. And we also have, again, our Human Rights Advisor, Devika Mathur, who's here to answer any questions that may arise. So I'll turn it over to Quincy. Thank you.
Thank you, Associate Director Markowski. Good evening. The purpose of this report this evening is to provide trustees with an update on the actions taken to establish the Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee and seek approval of the recommended committee selection criteria, recruitment strategy, and number of committee members. The purpose of the Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee is to act in a strategic advisory role to the Board of Trustees to support the DDSB in addressing intersectional anti-Black racism and to support student achievement and well-being for Black students, as is required under the DDSB's human rights, anti-discrimination, and anti-racism policy. After consultation with external partners and community members, we have adjusted the critical path that was presented to you in January to reflect the input we received. The actions completed to date, our refined plan with proposed new steps, and timelines are captured under the critical path implementation plan chart within the report. A list of individuals consulted with can be found within the completed actions chart. A consolidated list of those items requiring trustee approval can be found within the recommendations chart that begins on page 5 of the report. We would like to point out that the detail contained in this section of the report is being recommended as a result of the input received from community partners, leaders in human rights and anti-Black racism work, and other interested parties we have consulted with. We look forward to providing you with future updates as we continue the work of the Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee. We're happy to respond to any questions on our work at this time and respectfully request your consideration and approval of our recommendations.
Thank you, System Lead. Would anyone like to put forward the recommended motion? I'll open up the floor for discussion before we put forward a motion. Trustee Edwards.
And I understand that, again, the work that has gone forward. But as you mentioned, that this is supposed to address with, the intersectionality. And again, if we look at statistics for our Black youth and employment in the community, people who identify as Black and have a disability are further disadvantaged in our communities and in our schools. So I would say that I would really appreciate if we look at, when we're looking at criteria, as the same language that we had added for the human rights, that somebody who identifies, but identifies as Black, but also basically has lived experience or advocacy around accessibility, or as identifies with a disability. I really would appreciate that as well. Thank you.
Trustee Pinello.
Thank you, Chair. Through you. I just had a question around the period of time for the call out. So I gather that, it is also 3 weeks. I had thought the motion that we just passed for the human rights group was a 6-week call out, but it looks like it is also 3. But I guess my question is, do we feel that that's adequate time just in terms of if we're engaging with communities who may or may not enjoy engaging with us as a system, especially since it's a larger group. I think it's 15 memberships versus the 12 members in the other one. So I just wanted to know if any thought went into maybe extending to a 4-week call out to compensate for the fact that there's extra members on this group. So that was my question. Thanks.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Cunningham, and thank you for pointing your comments, Trustee Pinello. I will say that we had quite a bit of conversation in regards to the actual membership and how many members sit, and at the same time, what you expressed in relation to what a suitable time would be for the call out. I don't think it would be unreasonable. We did had mentioned that perhaps after the initial call out, if we were unable to secure the required amount of members, that there might be a need for a second call out. I don't have an exact time to mention on that, but that was something that was discussed. But to your point, I think it would be more than reasonable for us to amend it from 3 weeks to 4 weeks and still stick within the timelines that are presented within the report. I think that would be an easy adjustment.
Trustee Brown?
Thank you, and through you, Chair, I'd like to move this motion, but with Trustee Edwards' amendment or addition to include disability, abilities, accessibilities. Did I hear right? Yes.
And for clarity, does that also include Trustee Pinello's amended timeline?
Absolutely. No?
No, I just, sorry, through you, Chair Cunningham. The timeline is presented primarily for information and obviously input, and staff would obviously consider that, but the approval is for the selection criteria, the membership numbers, and the strategy, those 3 pieces.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
Can I get a seconder? Trustee Arsenault? Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. That brings us to the end of our agenda for today. Could I get a motion to adjourn? Seconder? This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.